started with Frank Williams, just an amazing leader. He just had so much respect in the team. There's been many lessons in this sport. I've gone so much. I've gone to a phase that I almost nearly quit my career because I was fed up with F1 world.
Hi, I'm Marc Priestley. I spent 10 years working at the McLaren Formula One team with the likes of Lewis Hamilton, Kimi Raikkonen, Fernando Alonso, Mika Hakkinen. But those are just the drivers. I also worked with amazing people behind the scenes. Adrian Newey, Ron Dennis. They all taught me valuable lessons that I now know are not just applicable to Formula One. My mission with this podcast is to help you to think more like a Formula One team might think about the challenges you might face in life, on a personal level, on a business level, being a parent, social challenges that you face. I hope you'll take away some valuable lessons that will help you on your own journey towards high performance. Welcome to Pitlane Life Lessons. On this week's episode, I've got Valtteri Bottas. We had an amazing conversation where he talked about some of the inspirational leaders that he's worked under, from Frank Williams, Toto Wolff to Fred Vasseur, as well as many others. But he also talked about the pressures of leadership himself, leading nearly 1,000 people inside an F1 team. Some of those pressures got to him at times in his career, even to the point of nearly quitting at the end of 2018. He shared many things that you'll have never heard him talk about before, and I really hope you enjoy the conversation. Valtteri, thank you so much for joining me on the Pitlane Life Lessons podcast. I want to get into some of the aspects of your career, and particularly, as you know about this podcast, some of the things that you've learned from it. You've been racing now in Formula One for over a decade, but I want to go back to the beginning of the journey because you started racing at around 6 years old. That's pretty young. So how much influence did your parents have over that? Were you pushed into a go-kart or were you pushing them to get into one?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. I definitely wasn't pushed into go-karts. It was me pushing myself into the sport. I started racing when I was 6. And initially it was when I was 5 years old. I saw a go-kart race in Finland. And when I saw the race, I was like, I got to try. And finally, when I got to try one, I knew that, okay, this is for me. And since that day, every day I was asking my parents, can we go to the track? Can I drive? Eventually managed to get a used go-kart that after school we could just go on the track and just drive and try and get better. So it was always me. And my parents, they questioned me quite often. I remember they were asking that I was still enjoying it. But then eventually they stopped asking because they knew that they saw in me that I'm loving it and I just want to drive more and more.
And I can imagine at 6 years old and in that early part of life, the speed is the adrenaline rush is obviously amazing, as I'm sure it still is today. But how much of that was the competitive spirit and how competitive were you outside of a kart? Were you really competitive at school, for example, with results against classmates? Did that run through your life at that point?
I've been always competitive, but mainly in sports. Somehow that didn't correlate to school, being competitive in school. So all the school sports I was, and any sports I did, like football or ice hockey, I was always super competitive. But I think it is my nature. And also when I started karting, initially it was definitely the feel of the speed and the adrenaline, but quite soon, luckily, it became to all the small details. How can I get faster? How can I actually win races? So that became more of an interest, the winning instead of the speed.
What about those details? How much were you going into detail? I mean, Formula One is obviously an industry built on attention to detail in almost every aspect. But all the way back then, when you were a kid, I guess that's less prevalent in that world. So how focused were you and what sort of details were you going into?
Yeah, I was really focused already, I think, on my first year of karting. And when we went to the track, usually with my dad, quite often there was nobody else. And I would just try different driving techniques, different lines, different braking points. And my dad would time all of my laps. And sometimes I would ask him to time just like a corner sections. Then I would try something different, whether it was with my driving or with the car setup, and see the different sectors that if it gets better or worse. And that always came from me. I wanted to do that stuff, and I was almost quite geeky about the small details and how to get faster, which I think is a good thing that I had an interest for it early on in my career. And I think through that I've definitely developed some of the skills that eventually allowed me to get to where I am.
And did you feel at the time that was unusual? So amongst your competitors of the same age, did you feel like you stood out as being a little bit different in how geeky you were?
I didn't actually, in my very early years in go-karts, I didn't see anyone probably trying that kind of stuff. And I mean, of course, yes, some are getting serious pretty early, but at least in my head, I felt like I was a step ahead of the competition, and I think the results started to speak themselves. It was only my second race in go-karts when I was 6. I won it, and in the beginning of my go-karting career, I was winning pretty much everything, So, and there must have been a reason for it.
Yeah. And so I suppose then, as you go through, maybe into your teenage years, I've heard you talk about age 12 being a year where you really sort of had to commit. I mean, that committing at still a very young age, when I guess a lot of your friends are doing other things. How was that sort of dynamic in the groups that you might have hung out with at school, where you might have had to, I can't come out with you tonight, guys. I can't come out and play football or ice hockey or whatever because I've got to go and commit to racing. Was that a difficult challenge for you at that age?
No, because I loved racing, so it was
Okay.
easy. I was never sad on going on a weekend trip with a caravan to a race weekend with go-karts or traveling and stuff. I never really felt like I've missed out that much.
So you didn't feel there was a cost to it, to making that choice?
If I start to think about like certain details, yes, probably like missing, mates' birthdays and stuff like that is never nice. But in the end, I would still rather be in my race car than any other place. So for me, because of the love for racing and my interest in it, I can't say that I had to make huge sacrifices because of that in terms of my time, because I just want to drive.
And so I suppose then in that regard, you having to prioritize the thing you love over the thing that maybe you don't quite love as much, let's put it that way. That idea of prioritizing things, I'm trying to draw out lessons at other people who are not Formula One drivers, who maybe not be on the same career path. How important is it to prioritize and figure out how you prioritize the right things at different stages of life?
It is important. If you want to achieve something and want to get somewhere, you need to prioritize things. You need to focus on the goal and let's say minimize other distraction or things that will take your time basically, or will be waste of time. So when I realized, like you said, I was about 12, that okay, I feel like I'm good at this. I might have a chance actually to make it a job one day and get to the big categories only if I really commit to it. And that's when I then minimized other things, and everything in my mind was all about F1 and how to get there. So.
What do you think? Obviously, you made it, and that's your career off the back of that has been a wonderful success story. Could you ever imagine back then, if you hadn't made it, if you had committed, all the effort, all that sacrifice, all the things you committed to get there, if for whatever reason circumstances had been different and you hadn't made it, how would you have dealt with that? Because it felt like you're going all in at that point.
Definitely going all in. At least I studied to be a car mechanic, so I got a degree on car mechanic.
Okay.
So that was kind of my, backup option, that at least, I've studied for something and I'm qualified for a job, So that would have been a backup plan. Yeah, but like you said, I was always all in, and I knew that in case I wouldn't make it to F1, then probably there's some other categories that I can target to. But I tried not to think about it too much and focus on my goal instead.
Okay. And obviously we now know you did make it, so it was a success. You got there. Can you remember what the biggest thing that surprised you about Formula One when you arrived in this world, having gone through the junior category, so you're not unfamiliar with racing at a pretty high level. What was it about stepping up, making that final step to F1 that was the biggest surprise for you?
Biggest surprise, even though I always got told that, the life will change in terms of how busy it gets and how much is going on outside driving, all the other events and stuff like that. That still surprised me, like how actually busy life it is, and it's definitely not just turning up to the race weekends and driving and then going home. There's so much more to it. The amount of partners the team has, gotta keep them happy. You have allocated days for those. Nowadays, especially the simulator work is a lot. And even in the race weekend, how much, once you get there, whether it's Wednesday night or Thursday morning, you've got a minute schedule till Sunday night and almost like no time to rest. So
yeah,
that was still a bit of a shock initially, that how can I actually perform at my best every weekend with all of these things going on,
Guys, I hope you're enjoying the conversation so far. If you can take a very quick moment to like, subscribe, follow, leave me a comment or a 5-star rating, I would really appreciate it. It makes a massive difference to the podcast. I always think about the idea of a Formula One driver stepping up from, whether it was Formula 3000 back in the day or F2 today. You take that final leap and all of a sudden, when almost all of your focus has just been on being a racing driver, you've now got to be a leader of maybe 1,000 people in your organization. You've got to be a TV presenter. You've got to be media savvy, represent partners. It's a huge transition, isn't it, for things that actually you're not necessarily always trained in. And do you feel like the sport could do better in that way in terms of preparing people differently for what is a huge change?
There was definitely lots of things to learn. Like I did many, I got caught by the media by, saying just the wrong word here and there, and then they catch you with a big headline or something,
Yeah.
But you learn to deal with the media, that's obviously quite important, and with the partners as well. It's not like, in junior categories, there is nowadays, and even when I was young, there was some training for like media training and stuff like that, which helps. But I think nowadays it's advanced quite a lot. So, the drivers who are aiming to be in F1, now they know what to expect and they are better prepared, I would say. But it's just, in the end, the best way to become better with all of those things is experience and doing it more and more until it becomes natural.
Yeah.
And until you realize that, okay, some of those things, they're actually not that important, and that the main thing is still driving.
So you've got to keep focus on the main goal. This idea of leadership, you inevitably have to be a leader. I've worked inside a Formula One team for many years. You look up to your drivers. They tend to be figureheads, a lot of attention, of course, but you also look to them for inspiration. You're leading effectively a lot of people. There's a lot of people inside the team at Sauber that look up to you, a lot of fans, of course, as well. How have you found that journey through leadership? And can we pick out 1 or 2 lessons of things that you might have tried, maybe that you failed at, but you now know are really important when it comes to leading other people?
It's it's interesting, like how my career evolved. Definitely, starting as a rookie, you're definitely not a leader, especially if you're joining a team with an older and more experienced teammate. Then eventually, I was teammates with Felipe Massa, who was obviously already really experienced when I was at Williams. Then I was with Lewis, and he was the leader, when I joined the team. But then when I joined Sauber, things changed. Suddenly I got a rookie teammate. I was the old guy. I was the more experienced guy. And there was much more weight put on my shoulders about the not only performance, but really trying to push the team forward and keep people motivated. And for me, it's been super interesting, and it's been actually quite natural for me to carry that role. And
what practical things can you think about? How do you motivate those people? On a daily basis, I'm thinking about, do you sort of pop around the team saying hello to everybody in the morning? Simple things like that. Do you give people a little bit of extra time? And what are the practical things that I'm thinking about? Leaders that are in a different industry today, whether people listening to this might have a small team at work or even a family, leading a family. What kind of small things can you do, or do you do, that you think help you in that leadership role now?
It is small things, actually, and it is actually, in the end, is about caring. Like if you actually care, about your teammates, let's say, and about the performance, then it's quite natural. If you have to start doing something that it just doesn't feel natural or it's not of your interest, then it's never going to work. So first of all, you need that passion you need that drive to achieve those goals together. And then, obviously you need to be good with humans, dealing with different kind of personalities and figuring out how to make most out of certain people, whether it's your race engineer or performance engineer or mechanic. It's about knowing them, working with them together, and treating them in a way that you feel like that's how they can perform the best. Whether it's, for some people it's about being supportive, or for some people it might be applying a bit of pressure. And the same thing with drivers. Everyone works differently. I think for me the biggest thing is learning the people, who they are, and then figuring out how can you make the best out of this person.
I think it's really, I think that's a really valuable lesson, and actually something that when I first started, I started at McLaren in 2000 under Ron Dennis, who was an inspirational leader in many ways, but I don't think his people skills are necessarily the best. But actually over time, I think because it was such a technical sport and almost all the focus was on the car and the technology, only in the last, I don't know, say 20 years, have we really understood that it is all these people behind the scenes that make that technology happen. I mean, you've worked under some great leaders, Toto Wolff, of course, Fred Vasseur, another one that springs to mind. What have you learned from some of the leaders that you've worked under that have helped to shape your career, and little moments like the ones you talked about that have really helped you?
I've had many different, let's say, bosses in this sport, and obviously started with Frank Williams. He was just an amazing leader because he just had so much respect in the team. Like when Frank rolled into the garage, everyone, their back went straight, and just tried to be more precise with everything, and he just had that respect, and people were racing for Frank and working for Frank because everyone felt like he deserved good results. So that was something quite unique. Then obviously with Toto, he's really good actually with people. Like he's for me he's a top leader because he can really work with different people, and I think he's always been really good at making the most out of people, and also figuring out if they're actually in the right role or not. And then with Fred, it's different kind of leadership. He's definitely more a calming factor, which at the moment I feel like is really good for Ferrari.
Yeah.
There's less, I think somehow things feel less hectic, less politic. He gives lots of responsibility to the people themselves, which might then, let's say, make some people flourish more. So again, very different kind of methods. And I've always learned something from somebody.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think it's a wonderful place. I think the Formula One world is full of inspirational people then we can all draw something from. So to have those touch points of people, particularly as you've worked across 3 different teams now.
The sport is human performance, even though it's, you said technology, but humans, they make the technology with their brain, and they need to perform. So
100%. You touched earlier on as you were coming up through the sport, particularly as a kid, about your idea of attention to detail, focusing on details that maybe others weren't. The sport, Formula One, is prevalent for attention to detail. It's everywhere. So how much of that, given that you had it in your life so early on, was that a natural progression, or was it a shock to see the levels that Formula One has when you got here? And also outside of Formula One, in your own life, away from the track, are you still that laser focused?
Yeah, definitely when I joined Formula One, when I first started to learn about the setup tools that you have, how many options you have on different details that you can set up the car, how the car is actually built. It's quite stressful initially and overwhelming to think that how can I actually set this car up perfectly, because there's so many options. But then once you just split a few things into different categories and you start to learn more about those and how the changes feel in the car, it actually becomes not so bad. It's still a lot, but initially it's quite a shock how many options you have with an F1 car. Yeah,
and outside of work, outside of Formula One, are you detail focused in your everyday?
Very, very focused. Like I love cycling, and I do some gravel events myself. I race in those, and millimeters in the bike details needs to be like perfect. So I think.
I mean, are you lining all the tins up in your cupboard to face a certain way, or are you not quite that far?
Not that far. When it's about performance, then I'm super detailed.
Okay.
In the kitchen, things can be a bit messy, but when it's about actual performance.
Interesting. You just mentioned cycling there. I once interviewed a guy who used to work at the Jaguar Formula One team back in the day and then went to run British cycling. And he had an interesting perspective on the difference between the two sports at the elite level. And one of the things I always remember he said to me was Formula One is 90% the car, 10% the driver. Cycling is almost exactly the opposite way round. He wasn't saying that 10% the driver brings is any less important because, of course, without the whole lot, you don't win. But is that something that you can relate to in terms of technology being so much of a part of what you do? Therefore, that 10% that you bring as a driver is obviously just as critical, isn't it?
That's why I like cycling, because it's like the opposite. You, as a human, you are the engine, you are the machine. And obviously still machinery plays a part, but that's why I love doing those events and challenging myself, because I feel like on the start line, pretty much everyone is on more or less on they have the same chances to win or do well. So for me, that's really refreshing, because like you mentioned with Formula One, you need the car, you need the team if you want to succeed. And it's not a fair sport, that's for sure. So I feel like cycling is definitely sometimes more fair.
Yeah.
But I think for me, it's almost like a balancing factor. That's why I like it.
And what about because obviously your girlfriend, Tiffany, is a professional cyclist. What have you learnt since your relationship with her was formed about the approach to the two sports, both at the very highest level, of course, in terms of training, in terms of mindset? There must be similarities, but also differences.
Yeah, I feel like with athletes, the mindset is almost always quite similar in any sports. You need to have the clear target and a plan how to get there. And then in the end, you just need discipline and hard work. And obviously what the work means is different in different sports. In cycling, that's 5 hours per day on a bike every single day, so it's different kind of suffering. For me, 5 hour sponsor event might be the suffering, but it's different things. But I really feel like with any top athletes, there's a lot in common. It's just a different sport. You do different things, but that mindset needs to be the same. And I've definitely learned a lot.
Do you train together?
We're lucky that we can train together. Obviously, I can't do all of her training. Otherwise, I would turn more into a cyclist than a race car driver. But I try as much as I have time and energy.
And what about things like daily routines? Do you have a really strict morning routine? And I'm interested in whether your routine in terms of the way you approach life generally compared to hers, for example, in cycling, and the importance of consistency, whatever the routine is.
I've actually, over the years, I've become more flexible on certain routines. I've learned to really listen to myself, like what I feel like that I need to be at my best. And quite often that's mentally, because in the end, yes, physically, with all the preparation I've done over the years and with the amount of training I do, I'm fit enough to win races. I know that. But in the end, the last bits, they will come from the mental power and how you can extract everything out of yourself mentally. So that's why I'm a bit more flexible. I would say more and more flexible and open-minded over the years, because you need to listen to yourself. What do you need? Like, I might have a routine that first thing in the morning is I have coffee, but then after that, I keep it quite flexible. Like if I feel like I'm actually a little bit stressed, instead of this boring gym session in the box, I just want to get out there with my bike and go to the mountains by myself. Then I do it because I know that that's going to clear my head. Yeah. And I can always do the gym session, let's say the day after. I used to be earlier in my career, like I had a plan for each week in terms of training, nutrition, everything, following everything step by step, being like a machine. But I was burning candles from both ends, so it's not sustainable.
Yeah, and I think particularly as a young athlete, but also at a young person at the beginning of a career in certain industries, there's a lot of pressure, isn't there, to conform to what is often seen to be the right way to approach these things. And it might be that if you're not seen to be burning the candle at both ends, you're not trying hard enough. I guess there must come a point, and I'm interested to know if, for the benefit of those listening, you can bring that point earlier in a career, a point where you decide that you don't need to conform. And actually, exactly as you said, listening to yourself is actually a better approach for a lot of people.
Yeah, I definitely say that the earlier you can go through realizing that, the better in your career. Usually there is a point that you realize that, okay, this is, if you want to have a longer career, that's not going to work. Or at least at some point you feel like you're not at your 100% anymore, because nobody can be at 100% every single day of the week. It needs to go in cycles. You need to give your body and mind some leash at times to be again at the peak. So yeah, it's a roller coaster of a sport and life, and you learn to deal with certain things a lot more better with more experience, and especially when you realize that, okay, some things in life shouldn't be that serious.
Yeah. I'm interested in talking about how you motivate yourself in the latter stages of your career, given that you spent a lot of time at Mercedes, where the target presumably was winning races, potentially winning championships. You've now jumped further back down the grid, where that may not, at the moment at least, seem like a viable option. And that'll be the same for a lot of people, in life in general and in the careers that they're in at this point. What can you share with people about setting yourself realistic targets and how important that is in terms of maintaining motivation?
I think initially, when I was a kid and I set my target to be F1, I think it's for some people it's quite unrealistic, going from a small town in Finland, but I always thought it was realistic. But then along the way, you got to be able to adjust your targets. Like example, when I joined Sauber Alpha after Mercedes, I knew that next year I'm not gonna fight for the race wins. And luckily, I had quite a few months to time and process it and accept it, and then it becomes setting different kind of targets along the way. And okay, by this race we want to be at this position, and by this point of the season, I want the team to be, having better team spirit than at the moment. And you just need to change your targets and be honest with them. This sport obviously is always more fun when you're doing good results, but at the same time, it's a job of many drivers who can't most often finish in the points. You still need to gotta make most out of it, and that's when you gotta reset your targets and make new goals and try and get there one way or the other. And that's the motivation, I would say now.
Sorry, when you hit those goals, whatever it might be, scoring a point, beating a particular rival, and I'm assuming this isn't just the case for you, but for everybody in the team, or lots of people in those teams, does it feel like the win? Is it your version of the win at this point in your career?
Yeah, it all becomes relative. It's we haven't now scored for a while, so eventually, once we get there, it's gonna be super rewarding, and like you said, we'll almost feel like a win. Not probably like a win, but almost. So it's a different perception, and it's all relative in this sport. But you just got to accept it.
Okay, let's quickly talk about the idea of picking yourself up off the floor when something goes wrong, or when you don't have that good result, because it inevitably happens in sport in general, but it also happens in life. You have bad days, or a project you deliver at work doesn't work, it fails. What can you talk to me about failure or this disappointment, and how you, and particularly in a role now where you might have to do this for other people around you, how do you help pick those people up, get them going again and focused on the next available opportunity?
It's all about being self-honest. If you're speaking about picking yourself up, is understanding what's gone wrong, being super honest if actually there's something that you could have done differently, whether it's at that moment when let's say a mistake or a disappointment happened, or something from the past. First of all, for me, is always understanding the issue, and then honestly within yourself processing it and making a plan for the future. Okay, what's next? How can I actually benefit from this situation rather than, just be sad for the rest of my life. And you can actually benefit so much from tough times, because that's when you always learn something new that you can use again later on in your life or career if you're approaching a similar situation. So learning for me is the key. And same thing with other people. If people fail, they need support. We humans, in the end, I think all of us can be quite fragile at times. And no one is different on that. No one is a machine. So people need support. And for me, if I see somebody struggling, needs an advice or, shoulder, I try to help the best I can. And usually talking is a simple thing, is talking about it can make such a big difference for a person if they've done a mistake, that they can then move on.
Yeah, and I think, when I was in the team at McLaren, if we had a bad day or a poor result or whatever, driver crashes, makes a mistake, I always used to look to that driver for some sort of inspiration as to how we should be approaching this disaster that's just happened. So the idea of you picking yourself up, I guess, has such a big impact on not just you, but a lot of those people that are around you in the team as well.
Yeah, it's I definitely feel like, if I would give up, then the team will give up as well. And if I show that I'm not going to give up and we're going to get there, then that will spread. So in team sports, it's always like that kind of feeling. It's always spreading, whether it's positive or negative. And
it must be tough sometimes when you're feeling really low.
It is sometimes, and I must admit, I've not always done the best job. It's not always easy to hide your emotions if you're frustrated, but then eventually, as quickly as possible, you gotta show that courage and leadership, and because the people deserve it. Yeah.
Well, I guess that all comes with experience. And I just want to wrap this up by, as we always do, I want to try and get the one Pitlane life lesson that has stuck with you more than any other throughout your time in this sport. A wonderful career with some amazing times, under some amazing people and working with some brilliant people. Is there one life lesson that we can pass on to everybody else that sticks with you in your mind?
There's been many lessons in this sport. I've gone so much. I've gone to a phase that I almost nearly quit my career because I was fed up with F1 world. And I thought it was just cruel to me. But then I came.
What sort of years was that, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, that was like end of 18. Okay. But then somehow I managed to pick myself up and win in the first race of 19. So that was the turning point for me. And
so that winter of between 18 and 19, there must have been some big lessons from that can help other people.
Yeah. I think in the end, I just I understood myself that sometimes you need time. Sometimes you need to step back and really look at the big picture. And that's what I actually quite often use nowadays in life, that if there's a tiny little setback somewhere, I try to just take a step back, look at the big picture, that, okay, things are actually quite okay. I've got family, they're healthy. I'm still driving a race car, what I love. I've got a roof on my top, and so in the end is when you take a step back and look at the whole picture of the life, that's when normally you can put things into perspective and maybe you start to complain less about certain things. So for me, it's that it's staying away of being just in the F1 bubble. For me, that's been really important.
Yeah. Well, what a perfect way to end. That really is great advice. Valtteri, I can't thank you enough. I feel like I could talk to you all day about some of this stuff, but I know you've got to go. But I really appreciate you taking the time. And there's an awful lot of really valuable advice that you've passed on. I think people listening to this, they're not in the same career as you, but the stuff you've shared is valuable in all walks of life. So I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, what a wonderful conversation that was. I'm so grateful to Valtteri and to the team for giving up his time and for being so open and honest and sharing things that I think are applicable and valuable to all of us. I really enjoyed it, so I hope you did too. Over the course of the next week, until I see you again, try and get as close as ever as you can to this. Do the right things, do the things right.